As dawn broke over the Pacific, a massive ship cut through fog-laced waves. On its deck stood a rocket unlike any before it, China's new Gravity-1 solid fuel carrier, perched ready for launch from the open ocean. Minutes later, under muted atmospheric hush, it fired itself free, lighting up the sky and ejecting 3 payload satellites into orbit. No launch pad, no drama, no global broadcast, just bare sea, steel, and space. The world woke not to bombastic fanfare, but a quiet signal. China's space program just rewrote the rules of launch. Over the next hour, we'll dive deep into how and why China built Gravity-1, the largest solid fuel rocket ever launched from the sea, the engineering breakthroughs that enabled ship-based orbital insertion, the 3 secret satellites it carried, who they belong to, what they do, what this means for US and private space efforts, maritime security and orbital power dynamics, what past launches, like Sea Launch, SpaceX's ship landings, taught us, and what this new move signals about space warfare. Stay until the end, because when they repeat this launch, it won't just be satellites that lift off. It'll be the quiet projection of global ambition. If you believe space should stay open, not strategic, subscribe now and turn on alerts. The debut of Gravity-1 from the sea is just the opening act. October 11 at 06:30 AM local time, somewhere off the coast of Shanwei, Guangdong. The sky was still grey when a 90-metre launch ship called Debo 3 rolled gently with the waves. On its deck stood a matte white column, the Gravity-1 rocket, China's newest and most powerful solid propellant orbital launcher. Unlike the towering liquid fuel Long March family, Gravity-1 carried no cryogenic tanks, no umbilical lines, no complex pre-launch plumbing. Its 4 solid stages were sealed, preloaded and ready. One command, one ignition, and the entire booster could go from idle to orbital in under 5 minutes. At 06:33:12, ignition came. A deep, rolling thunder spread across the South China Sea as 150 tons of solid propellant erupted in synchronized flame. The ship's hull shook, stabilizers counter-tilted, and within seconds the rocket tore free of its launch cradle, a moving platform hurling a 400-ton vehicle straight into the sky. No spaceport, no pad, no vulnerable target on land, just a floating island of steel that could appear anywhere. Chinese state media later confirmed that the launch successfully placed 3 satellites into orbit. All belong to Galaxy Space, a Beijing-based private company building China's answer to Starlink. Their names, Yunyao 3007, 08 and 09, barely drew attention outside aerospace circles. But inside those circles, the implications were seismic. Because Gravity-1 didn't just carry commercial payloads, it carried a proof of concept. This was the second time China had launched the world's biggest solid fuel rocket from the sea, and the message was unmistakable. The technology works, it's mobile, and it's scalable. When analysts reviewed footage released hours later, they noticed something else. The launch azimuth wasn't standard. Instead of heading due east, the rocket veered northeast, an inclination suited not for equatorial orbits, but for sun-synchronous or military reconnaissance trajectories. That single deviation sparked debate across global defense think tanks. Was this a civilian test, or a rehearsal for rapid response orbital deployment? Gravity-1's developer, Orion Space, described it as an independent commercial demonstration. But Orion Space's main investors include state-linked venture arms of the China Aerospace Science and Technology Corporation, CASC. And CASC's own documentation lists Gravity-1 under its dual-use rapid launch initiative. In other words, a rocket that could place satellites or surveillance networks into orbit from any ocean on Earth. No fixed pad means no diplomatic notice, no overflight clearance, no vulnerable infrastructure, just a ship, a rocket, and the sea. Western analysts immediately drew parallels to US Sea Launch, the multinational platform that operated from the Pacific in the 2000s. but Gravity-1 dwarfs those earlier efforts. At nearly 30 meters tall with a payload capacity exceeding 6.5 tons to low Earth orbit, it's now the largest solid-fuel rocket ever launched from water, larger even than the retired Minuteman III ICBM derivatives used for US suborbital tests. In solid propulsion, scale equals readiness. A solid booster can sit dormant for years, then launch within minutes. For civilian industry, that means cheap, mobile access to orbit. For militaries, it means something else entirely: the ability to launch without warning. As one anonymous European analyst told Aviation Week, sea-based solid launchers are the final step towards space as a fleet. Whoever perfects it first controls the orbital lanes. When Chinese engineers unveiled Gravity-1, even veteran aerospace analysts were stunned. A rocket of this size, running entirely on solid fuel, shouldn't have been possible, not with conventional design limits. And yet, there it was, a 4-stage, 30-meter launcher capable of lifting 6.5 metric tons to low Earth orbit. For context, that's almost twice the payload of Europe's Vega C, and achieved with no liquid propellant at all. Solid rockets have long been considered brute force machines, simple, reliable, but inflexible. Once ignited, they can't be throttled or shut down. Their efficiency, measured by specific impulse, rarely competes with the complex cryogenic engines used by SpaceX or Ariane. But Orion Space's engineers took a different approach. Instead of chasing efficiency, they chased responsiveness. At the heart of Gravity-1 lies a cluster of massive HTPB, hydroxyl terminated polybutadiene, composite motors, the same rubbery polymer used in modern strategic missiles, scaled up and redesigned for orbital lift. Each stage was filament wound using carbon fiber reinforced casing, trimming structural mass by nearly 20% compared to earlier Chinese designs. The first stage alone generates over 1,000 kilonewtons of thrust, equivalent to the combined output of 4 Falcon 1 boosters from SpaceX's early era. But the real innovation hides in its vector control system. Instead of moving entire nozzles, a challenge for large solid stages, Gravity-1 injects precise streams of gas into the exhaust, using thrust vector injection ports controlled by electro-pneumatic actuators. That allows fine steering even under the violent acceleration of solid combustion. It's a system adapted from China's latest ICBM technology, now repurposed for space. Engineers also introduce stage grain geometry, layering propellant in spirals that burn from center outward, changing thrust profiles mid-flight. This gives Gravity-1 a pseudo-throttle effect, enough control to shape orbital insertion without wasteful overburn. For solid fuel physics, that's bordering on the miraculous. The second and third stages are smaller, designed for precision orbital delivery. Each uses flex nozzle control and roll stabilization fins hidden beneath shrouds that deploy once the main body clears atmospheric drag. The upper stage, the payload carrier, carries a dual-ignition microthruster ring, allowing multiple restarts for final orbit trimming. That ring is powered by cold gas nitrogen thrusters, giving the vehicle a rare flexibility for a solid system. Combined, these innovations make Gravity-1 the first strategic-class solid rocket capable of multiple orbit deployment. Its official specs list a payload capacity of 6.5 tons to LEO and 4.2 tons to 700-kilometer sun-synchronous orbit, with a launch cost reportedly below $10,000 per kilogram, undercutting even some commercial liquid systems. And then there's the launch platform itself. The Debo-3 vessel is not a traditional barge, it's a fully stabilized self-propelled launch ship, equipped with dynamic positioning thrusters that can hold its coordinates within plus 10 meters even in 3-meter seas. That precision allows orbital azimuth control unmatched by fixed pads. It can sail anywhere, into equatorial waters for maximum efficiency, or polar seas for reconnaissance launches, without international clearance. In one internal Orion space presentation leaked in early 2025, a single line summed up the philosophy behind the program. If launch pads are targets, then the ocean is infinite. The message was subtle but unmistakable. A rocket that can launch from any sea lane effectively decouples space access from geography. It grants its owner global orbital mobility, a military and economic asset no nation currently matches. Experts call this shift maritime access to orbit. It's the same logic that turned aircraft carriers into tools of global projection. If the Long March series were China's Air Force, Gravity-1 is its Navy in space. When the second sea launch succeeded flawlessly, even skeptics admitted it marked the dawn of a new class, mobile, modular, and militarily significant. As aerospace historian Dr. Lin Chao observed, solid rockets began as weapons. Gravity-1 closes the circle by turning weapons technology back into exploration, only this time, the distinction between the two is razor thin. In Western press releases, Orion Space calls itself a commercial launch provider. Its official website highlights phrases like private enterprise, innovation, and open access. But in China, private rarely means independent, especially when rockets are involved. Behind Orion Space's startup branding lies a web of state-linked capital. Its seed funding came from CASIC Venture Capital, a subsidiary of the China Aerospace Science and Industry Corporation, one of Beijing's primary defense contractors. Additional backing came from Avic Trust, part of the massive Aviation Industry Corporation of China, which supplies fighter jet systems to the People's Liberation Army. So while Orion Space operates with commercial language and private partnerships, its hardware and oversight flow directly through the same state networks that manage missile production. That structure isn't accidental, it's strategic. In 2014, China's central government issued Directive 60, a national policy allowing civil-military fusion in emerging technologies from AI to aerospace. The directive encouraged private firms to share R&D pipelines with the military, ensuring that any commercial advancement could be repurposed for defense readiness. Gravity-1 was born in that ecosystem. Officially, the rocket's mission profile is to provide rapid, low-cost orbital services for commercial satellites. Unofficially, it's a rapid launch strategic asset, a mobile system capable of deploying or replacing military constellations within hours. Analysts at the Center for Strategic and International Studies, CSIS, call this responsive space doctrine. In plain terms, if China ever loses satellites in a conflict, ships carrying Gravity-1 rockets could sail from hidden ports, launch replacements from international waters, and restore orbital networks before an adversary could react. That's not just deterrence, that's resilience. The dual-use design becomes even clearer when you study the payloads. The 3 Yunyao 30 satellites lifted on the latest mission are described as meteorological and communications platforms. Yet their orbits, near-polar, sun-synchronous, and their onboard radar systems match those used in Earth observation constellations employed for both climate monitoring and military reconnaissance. Each satellite carries synthetic aperture radar capable of imaging through clouds and darkness, ideal for surveillance and targeting. In Chinese policy language, this is called integrated development. Every commercial payload must serve both national economy and national defense. That clause appears verbatim in Orion Space's regulatory filings. To Western observers, this blending of roles feels unsettling. A future where every private Chinese rocket doubles as potential defense infrastructure. But to Beijing, it's pragmatic. China's state media openly describe the Gravity-1 as part of the country's space security infrastructure. The term is intentionally broad, covering everything from broadband constellations to early warning systems. In the words of CASIC's vice director Wu Yanhua, the frontier of space must be both open and safe, which means mobile, flexible, and controllable. Flexibility is precisely what Gravity-1 delivers. A fixed spaceport can be mapped, targeted, and sanctioned. A ship can move, hide, and reappear under new flags. Launch azimuths can shift overnight, allowing trajectories that overfly no rival nations, an advantage even SpaceX doesn't have. Military analysts have a term for this capability: orbital maneuver sovereignty. It's the power to decide when and where you enter space. And who knows you did? For decades, only the United States had that privilege. With Gravity-1, China joins that club. The strategic implications ripple far beyond launch logistics. By perfecting mobile solid-fuel sea platforms, Beijing now controls the world's first deployable orbital factory, one that can operate outside traditional geopolitical boundaries. And because every rocket leaves no propellant residue and minimal telemetry, it's nearly invisible once the flame fades. The boundary between science and statecraft has never been thinner. Orion Space insists its focus solely on commercial customers, but every quote from company executives echoes China's long-term vision outlined in the 2021 Space Silk Road plan, a blueprint calling for a globally connected orbital economy under Chinese logistical control. Gravity-1 isn't just a launcher, it's the logistical backbone of that vision, the maritime supply line to space. As one US defense researcher put it after the second launch, China just proved it can project space power from the sea. The next question is, will it start projecting it beyond orbit? For decades, space launches were chained to geography. Cape Canaveral, Baikonur, Kourou, Jiuquan, each a patch of land bound by treaties, weather and visibility. But geography is a vulnerability. Fixed launch sites can be watched, sanctioned, or even targeted. To control the heavens, you must first free yourself from the ground. China understood that earlier than most. The South China Sea, long disputed, heavily militarized and dotted with artificial islands, wasn't chosen for its calm waters. It was chosen because it's sovereign, ambiguous and strategically perfect. By moving launches to the sea, Beijing gained something more valuable than orbital efficiency: jurisdictional freedom. When the Debo 3 ship sailed into open water carrying the Gravity-1 rocket, it did so under maritime commercial registration. Not military, not governmental, a civilian vessel conducting research and technology tests. That classification puts it outside traditional space treaty frameworks that govern national launch sites. In simple terms, no international notice, no foreign observers, no external oversight. Launching from sea also changes the legal map. Under the 1976 Registration Convention, nations must declare the location of their launch sites and resulting debris zones. But in international waters, a vessel can declare a temporary mobile operation zone without revealing exact coordinates. That gives China deniability, the ability to launch without the world knowing where or when until after it happens. Strategically, it's brilliant. Geopolitically, it's revolutionary. And militarily, it's game-changing. Western analysts call it the navalization of space. The concept mirrors what aircraft carriers did to 20th century warfare, turning oceans into mobile bases of power. If aircraft carriers made air dominance portable, sea-based rockets make orbital dominance portable. From a tactical standpoint, ocean launches offer several advantages. Azimuth freedom. Ships can move to any latitude, choosing optimal inclinations without flying over rival territories. Safety. Boosters fall into open ocean, avoiding populated regions and political friction. Surprise. Launches can be executed with minimal warning, complicating adversary surveillance. Continuity. If land pads are disabled by conflict or disaster, sea platforms maintain access to orbit. The logic is clear. Redundancy equals survivability. By 2027, China plans to operate 3 sea-based launch ships in rotation, each capable of carrying multiple Gravity-class rockets. According to an internal document from the China Maritime Satellite Launch Alliance, this fleet will ensure continuous orbital replenishment capability under all conditions. That phrase, all conditions, raised alarms in Washington. It suggests a system designed not just for peace, but for war resilience. The People's Liberation Army Navy, PLAN, already coordinates satellite coverage for maritime surveillance and anti-ship missile targeting. Adding mobile launch capability means that if satellites are destroyed in a conflict, replacements could be launched within hours from ships anywhere on the planet. It's not just a new logistics layer, it's a deterrent shield. The precedent is thin. Even during the Cold War, neither the US nor the Soviet Union mastered large-scale orbital launches from ships. The US tried with sea launch, but it relied on multinational partnerships and a single equatorial site. China's version is state-owned, self-contained, and unrestricted. Where sea launch was a commercial spectacle, Gravity-1's sea platform is quiet precision, a moving launch pad cloaked in routine shipping operations. There's also a psychological dimension. Every maritime launch demonstrates a truth that makes Western strategists uneasy. Space, once a realm of cooperation, is now being claimed like territory, not through flags, but through mobility. As Chinese state media proudly put it, the ocean is China's second launch pad, and the stars are its frontier. That statement wasn't a metaphor, it was doctrine. A doctrine now mirrored by new training exercises involving the PLA Strategic Support Force, the branch responsible for space warfare and cyber operations. Its official charter now includes protection of mobile launch assets. The integration is complete. For Beijing, ocean-based launch isn't a backup, it's the blueprint. Gravity-1's success is proof that China can build a distributed space network, where launch pads are ships, rockets are scalable, and orbital power sails with the tide. The rest of the world is still building launch towers. China is building launch fleets. Every rocket tells a story. Gravity-1's story isn't just about engineering brilliance, it's about a roadmap that stretches decades into the future. Inside Beijing's State Council, White Paper on Space Activities 2022, lies a phrase repeated again and again. By 2035, China will achieve comprehensive space power. To most readers, it sounds like rhetoric. To policy analysts, it's timestamp, a deadline by which China expects to become the dominant orbital actor across every domain: launch frequency, satellite coverage, deep space exploration, and orbital defense capability. Gravity-1 is one of the stepping stones that make that vision tangible. The 2035 blueprint Beijing's 2035 Space Power Roadmap, drafted by the China National Space Administration, CNSA, in cooperation with the People's Liberation Army Strategic Support Force, PLISF, outlines 3 overlapping phases. Access Phase, 2020-2025, develop independent, cost-effective launch systems. Status, achieved. Private firms like Orion Space, Galactic Energy and iSpace now field multiple orbital rockets. Mobility Phase, 2025-2030, transition launches to mobile sea-based platforms for flexibility and deniability. Status, active. Gravity-1's success marks the operational debut of Phase 2. Dominance Phase, 2030-2035, establish orbital logistics and autonomous satellite constellations to maintain continuous observation and communication over all domains in progress. Under this plan, China isn't simply populating orbit, it's building a networked architecture of control. Thousands of satellites will form overlapping constellations for the internet, reconnaissance, navigation, and space domain awareness. Each constellation is modular. If nodes are lost, mobile platforms like Gravity-1 can replace them immediately. This model mirrors terrestrial warfare logistics. The same way ships resupply fleets, sea-launched rockets will resupply orbit. That's the essence of orbital power projection: mobility, persistence, redundancy. The Mega Constellation Link. At the heart of this vision is the Guoang project, China's answer to Starlink. Planned at over 12,000 satellites, Guoang will provide high-speed internet, but its dual-use design also supports encrypted military communications and radar mapping. Gravity-1's payload capacity makes it ideal for deploying those clusters rapidly. especially from offshore waters where launch trajectories avoid populated zones. Each Guowang node doubles as a data relay asset, feeding imagery and telemetry back to Earth-based AI centers. When fully operational, this constellation will provide China with near-continuous surveillance over global maritime traffic, polar routes, and even foreign missile launches. For comparison, it will rival or surpass the combined coverage of all US and European commercial networks. Every time Gravity-1 sails, it lays another link in that orbital chain. The defense integration, the PLASEF, China's military branch responsible for space and cyber operations, now treats the orbital domain as a fifth theatre of warfare, alongside land, sea, air, and cyber. Internal briefings describe space as the ultimate high ground from which all other domains can be influenced. In 2026, the PLASEF introduced a term once limited to science fiction, orbital readiness level, a metric for how quickly assets can be launched, repositioned, or replaced. Gravity-1 drastically raises that readiness level. A single ship could carry 2 launches. A small flotilla could maintain round-the-clock orbital responsiveness. Combined with compact reconnaissance satellites, China could restore or reconfigure entire surveillance networks within a single day, an ability the United States currently lacks. Defense analysts compare this transformation to the nuclear age, not in destructive power, but in deterrent symmetry. The capacity to launch unpredictably from anywhere redefines escalation thresholds. How do you monitor, let alone deter, a country whose launch platforms sail freely across the globe? The strategic philosophy: space as infrastructure. In Beijing's view, space isn't a frontier, it's infrastructure. Just as railroads, highways, and undersea cables reshaped Earth's power dynamics, orbit is becoming the next logistical layer of civilization. By 2035, whoever controls orbital infrastructure will control information, weather prediction, trade routing, and warfare timing. Gravity-1 is a building block of that infrastructure, designed for a world where launches are as routine as flights. And because it runs on solid fuel, it embodies China's principle of permanent readiness. No cryogenic refueling, no fragile facilities, no countdowns that can be interrupted. In January 2027, Li Zhenyu, chief engineer at Arianespace, summarized the national philosophy on live television. The ocean is mobile, and so must be our access to space. We will bring orbit to the sea and space to every shore. It sounded poetic, but within China's policy circles it was treated as doctrine, the implications for the world. Every launch strengthens the precedent that the ocean is fair ground for orbital activity. No nation has yet challenged this interpretation, partly because international law is silent on it. The Outer Space Treaty forbids national appropriation of celestial bodies, but says nothing about where rockets can launch from. By exploiting that silence, China is carving out a grey zone, one where international norms lag behind innovation. In other words, the Gravity-1 rocket doesn't just go to space, it's rewriting the rules of who gets to go and from where. And if Beijing succeeds in making orbital logistics as fluid as maritime trade, the balance of global space power may shift permanently eastward. Section 6. The global response. How the US, SpaceX, and the private sector are reacting to China's mobile launch era. The morning China's Gravity-1 lifted off from the Debo 3 ship, radar operators in Hawaii, California, and Guam saw the same heat plume slide across their early warning monitors. Within minutes, the object was catalogued, tracked, and labelled Unidentified Launch, Maritime Origin. By sunrise, one fact was clear: China had done what no other power could, launched the world's largest solid-fuel rocket from the sea again. The ripples reached Washington before the smoke had cleared. The Pentagon's wake-up call. Inside the US Space Command headquarters in Colorado Springs, analysts convened an emergency review titled Sea-Based Launch and Responsive Threat Vectors. The conclusion was blunt. China's maritime orbital capability eliminates predictability. Current early warning systems assume fixed terrestrial launch pads. This assumption is obsolete. Within weeks, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, DARPA, dusted off an old file, Project Sea Raptor, a 2018 feasibility study for small payload ship launches using retired Trident missile casings. Funding resumed quietly under a new name. Rapid Maritime Access Initiative, RMAI. Its goal? Deploy small modular rockets from Navy vessels to re-establish launch symmetry with China by 2030. The commercial counterbalance. Meanwhile, the private sector, led inevitably by SpaceX, reacted in its own way. Elon Musk's engineers had already been experimenting with ship-based recovery for a decade. But Gravity-1 changed the calculus. If China could launch from ships, not just land rockets on them, the strategic advantage shifted. In mid-2026, SpaceX Maritime Operations began retrofitting its drone barges into full sea launch platforms under a project codenamed Blue Cradle. These modified vessels would use a miniaturized Starship upper stage paired with a reusable solid-core booster to perform rapid orbital insertions. Publicly, it was pitched as disaster response communications deployment. Privately, US officials saw it as a counterweight, the West's first serious move toward oceanic orbital mobility. Other companies followed. Rocket Lab announced trials of a floating electron platform near New Zealand. Relativity Space unveiled a design for 3D printed micro-launchers capable of containerized transport. Even Blue Origin, traditionally slow to adapt, filed patents for a seaborne reusable launch system with integrated cryogenic storage. Within months, a new phrase began circulating through industry papers: agile orbital logistics. Europe's dilemma. Europe watched with quiet concern. The Ariane Group, dependent on French Guiana's fixed equatorial pad, suddenly found itself strategically boxed in. European policymakers debated a floating Kourou, a ship-based extension capable of launching lightweight Vega C derivatives. But internal resistance slowed progress. Environmental regulations, maritime law, and cost overruns collided with political hesitation. As one ESA official admitted anonymously, "We still treat launches like cathedrals, permanent, sacred. The Chinese treat them like ships, mobile and disposable." That philosophical difference cut deep, the strategic realignment. By 2027, a quiet arms race had emerged, not in weapons, but in launch flexibility. The United States Navy began exploring ways to pair its Aegis destroyers with tracking systems capable of supporting civilian sea launches. Japan's Mitsubishi Heavy Industries accelerated work on the H-3 Light, a rapid launch variant designed for deployment from offshore barges. India's ISRO announced the Samudra launch program, studying semi-submersible platforms in the Bay of Bengal. In every case, the underlying goal was the same: to match China's newfound freedom of orbital movement. Because once a nation can launch from anywhere, its deterrence extends everywhere. The legal front. The shift also triggered panic in the diplomatic community. The UN Committee on the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space, a COPUOS, found itself debating questions never considered in the 1960s. Can a nation claim territorial immunity for a launch conducted from international waters? Who bears liability if debris falls across borders from a moving vessel? And, most uncomfortably, what if a rocket launched from the sea carries not satellites, but weapons? The Outer Space Treaty offered no answers. It assumed rockets launched from land under national jurisdiction. Maritime launches occupy a loophole, a grey ocean between law and physics. China's foreign ministry exploited that ambiguity expertly. When asked whether Debo 3's operations violated international norms, the spokesperson replied, "Our vessels sail lawfully. The ocean belongs to all humankind." It was the same argument once used to justify naval exploration, now applied to spaceflight. The psychological shift beyond the politics, the psychological impact was immense. For decades, the world associated orbital access with immovable infrastructure, towering gantries, countdowns, televised drama. Gravity-1 broke that myth. It proved that reaching orbit could be as fluid as shipping cargo, as discreet as refueling at sea. That realization unsettled even allies. As one US Air Force general confided off record, "When launch becomes logistics, surprise becomes strategy." It also inspired. Across startups and universities, young engineers began sketching mobile launch as the next frontier. Platforms that could chase optimal weather, latitude, and secrecy. In that sense, China had done what space programs rarely achieve: ignite a global redesign of how humanity reaches the stars. The balance restored. By the end of 2027, the US had completed its first RMAI test, launching a small satellite from the deck of a converted amphibious ship in the Pacific. The payload was trivial, a CubeSat relay. But the symbolism was monumental. The race was no longer about altitude, it was about agility. China's Gravity-1 had changed not just who could go to space, but how. And in doing so, it forced every other nation to confront a new reality. The sky, like the sea, now belongs to whoever can move fastest. Section 7. Hidden payloads. What Gravity-1 might really be carrying. When China confirmed that 3 Yunyao 30 satellites rode aboard the latest Gravity-1 launch, the official details stopped there. No orbital elements, no frequency allocations, no payload specifications, just a terse announcement. 3 satellites for meteorological observation and communication successfully deployed. To seasoned analysts, that wording was a red flag. Meteorological satellites rarely fly in clusters of 3, and they don't need to launch from the ocean. Weather data demands stability and continuity, not secrecy and mobility. So why did China deploy a sea-launched rapid response rocket, a strategic asset, for something as mundane as weather monitoring? The answer, according to independent orbital tracking networks, lies in the data that wasn't meant to be public. The orbit that doesn't fit. Within hours of launch, global observers using radar and optical telescopes detected 3 new objects in low Earth orbit, circling at 530 kilometers altitude, inclination 97.4 degrees, a near-perfect sun-synchronous path. That orbit is prized not for climate monitoring, but for reconnaissance and electronic intelligence, allowing a satellite to pass over the same region of Earth at the same local time each day. Even more curious was their spacing. Instead of forming a tight trio, the satellites separated to form a triangular pattern, each about 200 kilometers apart, a geometry ideal for signal triangulation. By measuring the slight differences in arrival time of radio emissions from Earth, such constellations can locate ground transmitters with pinpoint accuracy. In intelligence terms, that's geolocation warfare, the backbone of modern electronic reconnaissance. The radar mystery, public filings with the International Telecommunication Union (ITU), later revealed a new Chinese frequency band registered at X-band, 8-12 GHz, for synthetic aperture radar imaging. Those frequencies correspond to high-resolution radar capable of seeing through clouds and at night, the same technology used by US military satellites such as Lacrosse and Sentinel. Cross-checking orbits confirmed that the Yunyao 30 cluster passed directly over the Philippine Sea, South China Sea, and Taiwan Strait on every cycle. Meteorology? Unlikely. Surveillance? Almost certain. The Silent Network researchers at the Open Source Satellite Analysis Group, OSAG, discovered that the satellites were communicating not with China's public ground stations, but through a low-latency Ka-band relay linking to experimental nodes in the Guang mega constellation. That architecture allows real-time data transfer, no downlink delays, no regional gaps. In effect, these commercial satellites are plugged directly into a military-grade network. One analyst described it succinctly: Gravity-1 didn't launch weather satellites, it launched eyes and ears. The intelligence footprints, leaks from within the European Space Surveillance Network, suggest that one of the 3 satellites emits intermittent bursts on S-band frequencies, typically reserved for radar altimeters. But the pattern matches electronic intelligence calibration pulses, similar to those used by NATO's ELINT systems to test sensor arrays. In other words, one payload may be simulating foreign radar emissions, a decoy designed to test China's space-based detection algorithms. Even more intriguing, a 4th object, an unregistered debris fragment catalogued as Object D. was detected trailing 60 kilometers behind the main trio. It's too stable for debris. Its radar cross-section suggests a compact satellite roughly 1 meter wide, possibly a calibration target or inspector drone. If true, Gravity-1 may have carried a covert fourth payload, a microsatellite tasked with shadowing and inspecting the others, a capability used in space situational awareness, and potentially satellite interception. The pattern of concealment. This isn't the first time China blurred the line between civilian and military payloads. In 2023, the Xi'an-21 mission was billed as a technology verification satellite. Months later, it was caught maneuvering within 40 kilometers of another Chinese spacecraft. Behavior typical of on-orbit inspection or anti-satellite tests. By 2024, Western intelligence confirmed that several test payloads were dual-configured. One side optical, one side radar, both encrypted to mask true purpose. Gravity-1's cargo fits the same pattern. Its official payload description, communications and weather, is deliberately generic, a phrase that fits everything from internet satellites to battlefield reconnaissance platforms. The strategic logic. Why hide the payloads at all? Because plausible deniability is part of deterrence. If an adversary can't tell whether a satellite is commercial or military, everyone becomes both. That ambiguity forces opponents to treat all Chinese assets as potentially strategic, overloading their tracking networks and diluting focus. In military doctrine, that's called information saturation, a form of psychological warfare where uncertainty itself is the weapon. Gravity-1 enables that doctrine perfectly. Its launches are mobile, unannounced, and its cargo opaque. Every sea-based ignition sends a message. You will not know what we placed in orbit until it's too late to stop it. The Western view. When analysts at RAND Corporation modelled the scenario, they concluded that even a small fleet of Gravity-1 ships could maintain an on-orbit reserve of 200 reconnaissance satellites, enough to sustain global coverage during wartime. And because each satellite doubles as a communications relay, China's orbital architecture becomes both sensor and shield, detecting threats while ensuring its own command resilience. As one retired US intelligence officer put it, you don't need weapons in orbit to win space dominance. You just need more eyes, more ears, and the ability to replace them faster than anyone else. Gravity-1 provides exactly that. Section 8, the future of sea-based launch, what comes after gravity. When the first Gravity-1 thundered off the deck of Debo 3, it proved a principle. The second confirmed it. But the third, already under construction, will redefine it. Inside Orion Space's Hangzhou Design Center, engineers are assembling components for Gravity-2, a vehicle that will push the solid fuel concept to the edge of physics. A 2-core clustered booster capable of 12-ton payloads to low Earth orbit, and, most remarkably, partial reusability. According to a 2028 planning memo leaked to Global Times Tech, Gravity-2 will carry detachable solid grain segments with embedded retro thrusters and inflatable heat shields, allowing the outer casing to survive splashdown and be reloaded. If it works, China will achieve something every Western engineer once dismissed as impossible: a reusable solid-fuel orbital rocket. That advance matters for one reason: scale. The Ocean Launch Fleet. By 2030, Beijing plans to field a network of 5 mobile launch ships stationed at strategic choke points: the South China Sea, Western Pacific, Indian Ocean, Arctic Route, and Atlantic Corridor via Guarda Port. Each vessel, part of the Blue Harbor class, will carry 2 rockets, onboard integration facilities, and autonomous guidance buoys that create a floating geodesic grid for pinpoint navigation. Together, they form what Chinese planners call the Maritime Orbital Support Network, MOSN, a permanent distributed launch base that never touches land. Leaked procurement contracts show each ship fitted with a rapid fuel exchange cradle, allowing back-to-back launches within 36 hours. In peacetime, that means low-cost satellite deployment. In conflict, it means constant orbital replenishment, an oceanic conveyor belt feeding space. Beyond solid fuel, at the same time, China's universities are racing to merge solid and hybrid propulsion. The Harbin Institute of Technology is testing an aluminum ice propellant grain that melts into plasma under microwave ignition, delivering liquid engine efficiency without cryogenic storage. This frozen fuel could extend sea-based rockets into deep space missions, Mars cargo, lunar logistics, even asteroid mining platforms, all launched from ships that never dock. And then there's the rumoured Project Tianlong maritime variant, a liquid oxygen kerosene reusable booster designed specifically for ocean deployment. Renderings leaked online show folding grid fins, salt-proof seals, and a ballast system that rebalances the ship as the rocket lands vertically back on deck. If successful, China would combine the reusability of Starship with the mobility of Gravity-1, a synthesis no other nation has yet achieved. The orbital arsenal concept defence sources call the endgame the Maritime Orbital Arsenal, a fleet of ships capable of launching not just satellites, but modular payload pods, small self-propelled units stored in a orbit until needed. Each pod could carry communications routers, reconnaissance sensors, or electronic warfare packages that can be activated or replaced on demand. In effect, Earth's oceans would become floating launch magazines, feeding an orbital cloud of adaptive hardware. Western intelligence analysts fear that by the early 2030s, China will have enough mobile capacity to replace its entire low Earth satellite layer within a week, a strategic redundancy the US could not match without commandeering commercial fleets. And because these launches would occur from neutral waters, legal interception would be nearly impossible. The economic horizon. But not all of this future is military. China's maritime launch technology dovetails with its Blue Economy initiative, aiming to turn offshore platforms into dual-use infrastructure, part launch pad, part energy hub. Imagine a vessel that harvests wind and solar power while doubling as a spaceport, self-sustaining, self-defending, globally mobile. That's the 2035 vision. Orbit as trade route, rockets as cargo ships, and the sea as runway. The Western counter-moves. In response, NASA and the US Department of Commerce have formed the Maritime Launch Standards Consortium, an international framework to regulate and verify sea-based launches. But enforcement will be difficult. As one policy analyst put it, you can track a launch pad, you can't track an ocean. Even private companies are adjusting. SpaceX's Blue Origin project is accelerating, and European startups in Norway and Spain are developing small ship platforms for polar orbit launches. Still none match China's scale or integration. A new era of spacefaring. Every great age of exploration begins with mobility. The sailing ships of the 1500s opened continents. Aircraft carriers redefined warfare in the 1900s. Now, the floating rocket will redefine space in the 2030s. Gravity-1 was the prototype. Gravity-2 and its descendants will be the fleet. The seas that once separated nations may soon unite them in orbit, or divide them permanently depending on who controls the horizon. Section 9. The consequences. How sea-based launches could reshape global security, economy, and the law of space. Every breakthrough carries a shadow. For centuries, the sea represented freedom. No borders, no ownership, no limits. Now, that same ocean has become the launch pad for the next great contest. Who owns the sky above it? When China's Gravity-1 ignited from the deck of Debo 3, it didn't just lift satellites. It lifted questions that the world still isn't ready to answer. 1. The security consequence. Orbital deterrence without declared weapons. Space treaties forbid weapons of mass destruction in orbit, but they say nothing about capabilities. A radar satellite that can track a typhoon can also track an aircraft carrier. A relay constellation that routes internet traffic can just as easily carry encrypted command data. By moving launch pads onto ships, China, and soon others, gain the ability to deploy such dual-use payloads without the months of notice normally given for land-based launches. It's the stealth factor that changes everything. A vessel can drift beyond radar coverage, ignite its engines, and put a reconnaissance cluster into polar orbit before anyone can confirm its purpose. Surveillance becomes indistinguishable from strike preparation. Strategists call this latent deterrence. It's not the weapon you launch, it's the uncertainty you create by being able to launch anything, anytime. That uncertainty shifts the balance of fear. Adversaries must assume every object is potentially strategic. For the first time, the line between civilian satellite and military asset has effectively evaporated. 2. The economic consequence. A new maritime economy for orbit space has always been expensive because launch infrastructure was immobile. Build a pad, pay for upkeep, wait for weather. Sea-based systems invert that model. A mobile platform can chase optimal latitudes and seasons, cutting costs dramatically. By 2035, analysts at Morgan Tech Aerospace Index estimate that mobile launches could reduce per kilogram prices by 40%, adding $100 billion in new orbital trade annually. That trade won't just be satellites. It will be data, imagery, bandwidth, the raw materials of the information age. Whoever controls sea-based logistics will effectively control the on-ramps to orbit. Ports like Shanghai, Gwadar and Lagos could become the new Cape Canaveral of the developing world, each hosting launch fleets instead of cargo ships. But with prosperity comes monopoly. If one nation dominates maritime launch infrastructure, it also controls the orbital marketplace. Insurance, licensing, and even frequency allocation could bend toward whoever provides access. Gravity-1 in that sense isn't just a rocket, it's a currency of access. 3. The legal consequence. The grey zone between sea and sky. When the Outer Space Treaty was drafted in 1967, its authors imagined rockets roaring from deserts and steppes, not rolling decks. It never defined what counts as a national launch site, or who has jurisdiction when a rocket ignites in international waters. China's sea launches exploit that silence. If a satellite launched from the Pacific collides with another nation's asset, who's liable? The ship's owner, the flag state, or the company that loaded the payload? No one can say. The UN Liability Convention assumes fixed coordinates for debris tracking. Moving platforms make that math impossible. Maritime lawyers now call this emerging loophole astro-sovereignty drift. It's the same legal ambiguity that allowed 19th century empires to claim uncharted seas. Only now the territory isn't water, it's orbit. Several nations, led by the United States and Japan, are pushing for a new maritime space protocol to require pre-launch notifications and safety zones. China has not signed on. Until it does, every mobile ignition technically occurs in a vacuum of law, a place where ambition outpaces regulation. 4. The political consequence. Space as the fifth ocean. The geopolitical metaphor is shifting. Where once superpowers competed for continents, then for seas, then for cyberspace, now they compete for orbit. And orbit behaves like an ocean. Vast, dynamic, and full of choke points. Low Earth orbit is the new Strait of Malacca. Geostationary orbit is the new Panama Canal. Control those lanes, and you control the flow of information and commerce. China's 2035 roadmap envisions orbit not as a void, but as a transport layer linking every domain: land, sea, air, and digital. Its doctrine of integrated domain awareness merges satellite reconnaissance, AI analytics, and maritime mobility into one continuous network. That integration effectively makes the sea a launch zone and orbit a battlefield. The West, still treating space as a neutral commons, faces a paradox. To preserve openness, it must now defend it militarily. 5, the cultural consequence, rewriting humanity's relationship with the sky. For ordinary citizens, the Gravity-1 launch may have seemed like another headline in the endless march of space progress. But historians will see it differently. It marks the moment space stopped being a place above politics and became an extension of it. The ocean used to separate us. Now it connects weapons, markets, and dreams. The same waves that carried explorers centuries ago now carry rockets. The same horizon that once symbolized freedom now hides a countdown. Humanity has turned the sea into a mirror, and in it, we see our future reflected. Ambitious, ingenious, and deeply divided. The choice ahead. We stand at a threshold. Sea-based launch could democratize space, making orbit accessible to every coastal nation. Or it could militarize it beyond redemption, transforming oceans into stealth platforms and satellites into pawns. The decision won't be made by rockets or algorithms. It will be made by how the world responds now, whether we build treaties as fast as we build boosters, and whether we remember that mobility without ethics leads not to progress, but to drift. Because for all its innovation, Gravity-1 also carries a warning written between its lines of flame. The more mobile power becomes, the harder it is to contain. The camera drifts above the ocean at twilight. No coastline, no towers, no launch pads. Just a single ship, lights dim, deck silent, floating on a mirror of calm water. And then, without fanfare, a distant glow blooms at the horizon. A column of fire rises, painting the waves gold. A machine built by human hands leaves Earth not from land but from the sea. That is the image that defines this new era. For the first time in history, our path to the stars no longer begins on solid ground. It begins adrift, in motion, on a world that itself never stands still. Gravity-1 wasn't just a rocket. It was a signal that humanity had entered the age of floating spaceports. The shift beneath the surface. In the past, every great leap outward was anchored to something immovable, pyramids for observation, launch towers for ascent. But mobility has become our new monument. We've learned that to survive in a shifting world, our ambitions must shift with it. The ocean, once a barrier, is now the bridge between Earth and space. And the engineers who welded steel to salt water may have unknowingly solved one of civilization's oldest paradoxes, how to make permanence out of movement. Yet beneath that achievement lies unease, because mobility is power, and power rarely stays neutral. A rocket that can launch anywhere can serve anyone, or anything. It can deliver internet for the disconnected or surveillance for the unaccountable. It can map the stars or monitor the Earth. The same ignition can illuminate or intimidate. We used to say space was the final frontier, but frontiers imply distance, something far away. Now, the frontier floats just beyond the horizon, its engines echoing across the sea, the human element. Behind the data, the politics, the propulsion equations, there are still people, welders who hear the sea crash beneath their feet as they bolt engines into place, technicians who smell burnt salt in the air as the rocket ignites, scientists who watch their creation vanish into darkness, knowing it will never come back. They are not soldiers or strategists, they are dreamers. The same kind humanity has always relied on to cross dangerous waters. For them, every launch is a message that we can still rise even when surrounded by uncertainty. But history is watching, because what we build today, these mobile gateways to orbit, will determine whether space becomes the next commons of progress or the next battlefield of control. The symbol and the warning. When future generations look back, they may see Gravity-1 the way we see the Wright Flyer or Apollo 11, not for what it was, but for what it unlocked. A moment when technology outpaced ideology, when the horizon grew wider than law, and when humanity proved once again that it will always find a way to go farther, but they will also see a warning that every time we expand our reach, we must expand our restraint, because the same fire that lifts us can just as easily burn what we leave behind. The ocean taught us that. It remembers every empire that tried to rule it. It reminds us that control is temporary, but motion is eternal. And perhaps that's the true legacy of the floating spaceport. Not domination, but humility. The realization that we rise only when we learn to move with the world, not against it. As the closing credits roll, the screen fades to black, leaving only the sound of waves, rhythmic, endless, ancient. Then a voice, quiet but resolute. Some launches change technology, others change destiny. Gravity-1 did both. Stay curious, stay awake, and remember, the next time you look at the ocean, you might be staring at Earth's newest launch pad and humanity's next great gamble.